I'm Sam Roberts of the New York Times, and welcome to the New York Times Close-Up. This week is ping-ponged from one accusation to another, one denial to another. The president's language, far from presidential, it stung our first guest directly. His parents came from two of the countries the president maligned. Kwame Opam, a New York Times editor for digital storytelling and training, joins me in a moment. My Times colleagues have plenty of issues to discuss. We'll give them the floor on the backstory, and I'll have some final thoughts on Coda. But first, Kwame Opam, an editor for digital storytelling and training, his race-related article resonated strongly with all of us. And Kwame, you said in that piece, in that race-related newsletter from the Times, that the president invalidated the struggle that brought your parents to the United States. Tell us a little bit about where they came from and why that was the struggle and what the impact of the president's remarks was.
Sure. So to give you some context, my mother and father came from Haiti and Ghana, respectively. So my mother came to the States in '75, me with my grandparents who'd come in the '60s, and spent her teens up until her young adult life studying, learning English, and then went on to college, went on to Delphi, then to medical school because she wanted to be a doctor. My father came in 1980, and he came for soil chemistry and agricultural science. And then when he met my mother in '83, he fell in love with her, and they went to medical school together. And both worked hard, married in '85, had me in '87. And really the story of them being together and me growing up is really them working hard to give me a life here. And the idea that their countries aren't worthy of coming here as compared to countries like Norway seemed, when those comments were made, hurtful and really false, because the idea that anyone coming from those countries is unworthy of like the American dream kind of is counter to everything that my parents fought and worked hard for.
Did they come here for the American dream?
In a lot of ways, yeah. They came here for better lives and really to make their way and find opportunities. It's not the sense that like they were struggling where they came from. It's really the sense that they came here to really make their way and make their own lives.
And one of the things the president seemed to disregard is that immigrants historically have always come here as sort of a self-selected group. They were the ones who were able, for one reason or another, to pull themselves up and actually have the gumption to be able to make it here.
Sure. My mother's family actually were among the elites in Haiti, so they were able to come here fairly easily. My father's father went to boarding school and came to the States to go to Auburn University to study because he did well. So this idea that they're unworthy or not of the kind of character of other countries just seemed silly.
And how did they react to the president's remarks?
My mother, when I called her that day, she didn't believe it. She doesn't follow the news the way that we do. So I told her, and she said, let me check this. This doesn't seem right. My father follows the news constantly, and he was immediately like, this is annoying, and this is completely outlandish. So we had a long conversation about everything that they did together, and it just flew in the face of everything the president said. And
are they in touch with relatives back in Haiti, back in Ghana, and what kind of reaction did they have?
Oh, my father keeps in touch with family in Ghana all the time, and of course they are upset. A lot of my family from Haiti is here, so obviously, everything involving Haiti that's been said before they keep up with. And, it's a struggle to just to deal with these things and hear these things on an ongoing basis.
You wrote in the race-related piece that when you were growing up in Queens, your parents said, always tell everyone that your parents are doctors. Why did they say that?
I grew up in Queens, I grew up in Little Neck, and, largely white enclave. So when I went to school, I remember my father saying repeatedly, like, tell your friends that we're doctors, tell your friends that, like, you come from, like, great stuff. And when I was a kid, this seemed, the height of annoying. You don't want to tell your friends, like, oh, well, let me tell you about my parents. But the idea that they wanted to prove themselves and also say that we belong here really kind of resonated with me as I got older.
So you resented it then, but now you understand it?
Now I understand it. I wouldn't tell my kid to do that, but I understand it now.
What do you tell your kid growing up? Or what would you tell your kid, given the atmosphere now about immigrants, and particularly immigrants from countries that his or her grandparents came from?
I would try to tell them that the idea that you can come here is to acknowledge the humanity of anyone coming from any place, that there's no such thing as people being better than other people because of where they come from, because of their country of origin. But if you come here and your idea is that you chase something, you have an idea, you want to work toward it, then do it. That's the idea.
Have you ever felt discrimination here?
Sure. So again, growing up in a largely white enclave, I didn't face the kind of overt racism that my parents did coming here in like the 70s and 80s. I did feel prejudice. I did feel isolated in the sense of like me not having a lot of black peers around me. I did have run-ins with like peers like kind of judging me in certain ways. But apart from those like experiences, for the most part, I'd say my growing up here has been altogether smooth, apart from the things that I've observed in media and in the news, etc.
Tell our viewers what a digital storyteller does at the New York Times.
So as a result of the 2020 report, my group, the digital training team, works with the newsroom to design curricula for improving the digital report, whether that's improving actual stories for video and phones, or it might simply be how we communicate using things like Slack or email, etc.
What makes a good story digitally on video? What makes a story that is not as good for whatever reason as one you might read in print?
So it's really more to do with the web, and mobile web affords us so many opportunities to tell different kinds of stories. So a lot of the time we'll devote our energies on writing 800-word pieces, and that will be the bread and butter of our report. But with things like vertical video or platforms like YouTube and Facebook, we have the ability to tell the kind of stories that are still times in terms of quality, in terms of the breadth and depth of our reporting, but also can cater to different audiences depending on where they are platform-wise or what they're actually watching or looking at. And
people are going to these sites, going to nytimes.com and actually going to video, something obviously they never would have done in the paper.
Sure. That is growing, our subscriber base is growing. And really, by the time we hit 2020, the idea is that we'll have grown in a way that we can completely support ourselves as subscribers.
It's really remarkable because when we started this program 25 years ago, the Times' attitude toward television was a little bit different than it is now, needless to say. One of the things you wrote about on Verge, which you came from the website, was you concerned that the Times, like a lot of other news organizations, had gotten rid of the public editor, the ombudsman. And you know, the idea was that the reader center would kind of make up for that. There'd be more reader participation, people more involved in shaping stories, in monitoring stories. Do you think that has worked out so far?
I think it's working. I think it's the reader center stepping into the area where they're engaging with the audience, which is everything to do with actually building our subscribers, is of a piece with us speaking to and being accountable to the readers. So the public editor being lost created an opportunity kind of for the reader to engage with the editors and reporters in a way that they never really did before.
And do people react positively to this, both readers and reporters, do you think?
I think they react pretty positively. Ultimately, if you're able to go to a piece about what's been put in the paper and Dean Baquet is able to respond to it, an editor in the obit section is able to respond to it regarding a recent piece about a Mormon figure who recently passed, and the response is such that people are able to learn about the process and learn about why we make the decisions that we do, then it's ultimately really powerful.
I always find that people are so surprised when we respond personally that it really changes their whole attitude. Kwame Opam, thank you for joining us. You can find the article in the race-related nytimes.com/race-related. And in a moment, my Times colleagues discuss the key issues of the week on The Backstory. Welcome back. Another week of where to begin. We might as well start with the president's comments about the people from Haiti and African countries. The debate about which expletive he used is just a sidebar to the explicit anger. The results of the president's physical raised questions, and Governor Cuomo proposed a tentative budget which called for federal tax changes, called them a missile aimed at New York. Joining me to discuss these stories and more, my Times colleagues, national political correspondent and CNN analyst Alexander Burns, Metro political correspondent Shane Goldmacher, Metro immigration reporter Liz Robbins, and Metro social services reporter Nikita Stewart. Shane, you cover local politics, but you were running around Iowa last month with the mayor. What kind of reaction did he get there? Does anybody care that he was there?
No.
Okay. In a word?
Little fascinating tidbit, the police union here sent people out to Iowa to protest him on the street. And I have to say this was one of the more effective political protests I've seen, because all the people arriving at this event with Bill de Blasio knew nothing about Bill de Blasio. So the only piece of information they had was somehow the police union doesn't like him. And he's the mayor of New York.
Always important not to let your opponents define you, right?
And literally the first thing they learned was a pamphlet handed to them by a cop from New York City.
And what about Governor Cuomo? He has a $30 million war chest for re-election. Is that why nobody's running against him?
I think it's a big part of why nobody's running against him. You saw in the last few weeks the leading Republican candidate was a guy named Harry Wilson. He bowed out. He talked about spending $10 million of his own money, not in the race. At this point, they're left with people who party leaders don't really want to be the nominee. A legislative leader, not the kind of person who is going to take out an incumbent governor typically. Other local officials, a lobbyist who gave money to the Democratic Party just a few weeks ago. So he's looking pretty good, and that money, which he reported this week, is scaring away potential other challengers.
And you had a fascinating insight in your story in the Times into his biggest individual expenditure.
The single biggest thing he spent money on, he's very cheap when it comes to spending his campaign money. He has very minimal staff. The single biggest thing he spent his money on was giving away Harvey Weinstein's money, which was more than $100,000 over the last few years.
Giving it back.
Giving it back to a women's group, but he held on to the money until this filing deadline. So he earns interest on his money, and he earned interest on it until the very last moment.
Earning interest on $30 million sounds like a pretty good investment. Alex, you've been covering the presidential race as it's looming, and also the 2018 congressional elections. What about Oprah? Is that a serious candidacy or not?
Well, it's not a totally pie in the sky possibility. That folks who have talked to her over the last few months have said that she has spoken about wanting to help heal the country, wanting to help bring people together, and who knows exactly what that really means. It was pretty telling. I think when she gave that speech at the Golden Globes, there was this sense that she'll knock this down pretty fast, and she hasn't, right? That if she wanted to end speculation about 2020, she could do that immediately.
Whether or not it would be believable.
Right, exactly. I do think that the best way to view the sort of Oprah mania is that she is kind of the platonic ideal of what a Democratic candidate could look like, right? That she has star power. She'd be the first black woman ever to become president, first woman ever to become president. She's close with Obama. She's hugely admired in the country. And when you look at the rest of the field of Democrats who are thinking about running, maybe some of them have small Oprah-like characteristics, but there's just nobody who's a giant figure like that.
No, it is, of course, 2 years before the election, but as you say, no one really has that kind of star power yet. Liz, talking about events in Washington, the Dreamers Act, the DACA Act, the act that would let people who were brought to this country as kids to stay, where is that likely to go in all the budget and other negotiations?
Sam, it changes every hour. And as one DACA recipient told me last week, it's like a telenovela. Every day is different, and we're just trying to figure out where we're going to end up. So with the DACA recipients, it's really interesting because of a court decision out in California. They were allowed to renew. And so even though the president had ended the program on September 5th, they were now allowed to renew because of this court order. But then the DOJ said they're going to be appealing this, and they want the Supreme Court to review the decision. So nobody really knows. And this week I spent it with DACA recipients who were rushing lawyers' offices trying to get their permits, which would be a 2-year protection from deportation. So it's temporary, but allows them to work, which would give them money for school. But everybody that I've spoken with says that it is all about immigration reform. And so a DREAM Act that would give them full protection, permanent protection, is what they really want. And so it's all so temporary. And I have to say, it may be kicked down, I would say kicked down the street. But nobody really knows. The president has given contrasting views on Twitter.
He certainly has. I mean, he seemed to suggest that a immigration law agreement was somehow within reach, and then it vanished
then blaming
overnight.
the Democrats for it, and the comments that you referenced in the beginning didn't help. And I think that exploded this whole scene of what the government, the administration is feeling about immigrants, and this idea of migration, chain migration versus family reunification. There are all these hot buttons that people are trying to harness right now, and everything's getting confused. So maybe in 2 days it'll be different.
Nikita, January is the month that we count the homeless in New York City. We can define homeless in different ways, but this group is certainly, by any standards, homeless. They are out sleeping in the street. How does the city do that? Why does the city do that? And tell us about the insight you've had in the Times recently about some quirk in the count.
Okay, well, you know, the city, like you were saying, counts people who are living on the street every year. This is part of a national count called Point in Time that's run by HUD. And the idea is to try to understand how many people are actually living on the street and how many people are homeless overall, so that we can decide how much federal funding is needed, you know, how much each city should get. Last year, the city estimated 3,900 people, and it was a huge jump from previous years. It was alarming. So now the city is really under the gun to, you know, check and double check and triple check and see if that number has come down or if it's gone up. And one of the interesting things about the count is that people don't know that there are decoys, people who pretend to be homeless, who are there to make sure that all of these thousands of volunteers are actually counting correctly. Because if you miss a decoy, you know, maybe you've missed several other people. And so these decoys actually act as sort of a margin of error for the city in its count.
How do you act homeless, and what do they get out of being a decoy?
Well, there are generally about 200 decoys who show up for duty. They're paid $85, which isn't much, but a lot of them consider it a civic duty because many of the decoys used to live on the street. And so they know where people should be standing, and that not all homeless people are necessarily mentally ill or bedraggled or, you know, on drugs. You know, they're sitting in suits like Shane and Alex, and might be on the train, and you think they're maybe going to Wall Street early in the morning to get into the office by 5 a.m., but they're actually homeless.
Our suits aren't that nice.
Are there actors who do it?
There are some actors who do it, but overwhelmingly the numbers are folks who have been on the street before.
And what do they get for that?
$85.
$85.
And a sense of duty.
And a sense of duty, right. Civic responsibility.
Yes.
Alex, we talked about the mayor running for president. We talked about Oprah running for president. What about the governor and his possible chances in 2020? Is that a serious race? I mean, his father always said an Italian from New York could never get elected, would never win in the South, for instance. Is it any different these years later and with Andrew rather than Mario Cuomo?
Well, there are a couple questions there. So you know, I think the notion that somebody who is very identifiably New York in their mannerisms and cultural orientation can't win in the South was pretty well obliterated in 2016. I don't think that there's any there's no particular reason to believe at this point that being an Italian American is an impediment in politics.
Although we've never had one who's been president.
No, but you have, you know, members of Congress from a place like Mississippi with an Italian last name, right? This is not some outlandish ethnicity to people, you know, even sort of deep in the heartland at this point. And it's an open question whether it would have really been an impediment to Mario Cuomo at the time. Look, as far as Andrew Cuomo specifically, The fact that, as Shane said, he's not going to have a particularly arduous re-election campaign does give him a longer runway to think about running for president. If he had to, really work it, really deplete himself over the next 10 months, that'd be harder for him then to turn around a couple months later and start running for president. But, his record in New York has made him popular here, but he has not been a hero to the national left in the way that virtually everyone else who's thinking serious about running for president in that party has been. There are a lot of folks in important Democratic interest groups who would be very, very skeptical about the idea of him as the nominee.
Is there any constituency for him at all at this point, nationally?
Well, he has a story to tell about getting things done, and he has a story to tell about a series of policies, big policies like family leave, gay marriage, different kinds of legal protections for vulnerable populations that could very well resonate with different parts of the Democratic Party. The problem is that's true of almost everyone else who's thinking of running for president, that it's not like he's distinctive in his support for gun control.
The advantage that he would have is that he's a governor, and historically governors have done well. And there is an extraordinarily weak bench of Democratic governors across the country. Mm-hmm. And come 2019, he will probably be the most prominent sitting Democratic governor who could potentially run for president. Terry McAuliffe, the former governor of Virginia, probably is in that category, but he will be an ex-governor by then. I think his one potential advantage is I've governed a large, complex state. His whole argument about everything is I'm capable, I'm competent, and I'm a doer.
And people around the country obviously love New York now. Speaking of which, the president made a number of gaffes this week, if you want to call them that. His epithet referring to Ghana or African countries and Haiti, and his physical, in which his doctor said he's in excellent health, some questions about that. And what about fake news? He awarded fake news awards to a number of organizations, including 2 for the Times. Do we care about any of that? Does that affect our coverage at all? Does that affect our attitude at all? I know we're not supposed to have opinions, we're not supposed to react to things like that, but does it make any difference?
No, we cover real news. Doesn't make any difference.
Good answer.
I think that Donald Trump brought more attention to an RNC press release than anyone ever has in history, and then their servers crashed.
Right.
Look, first of all, Sam, I think it's important to say it's an honor just to be nominated. So the fact that we actually got 2 awards, I think, is a big deal. I do think it's sort of an interesting moment for the internal conversation in media, where people kind of seesaw back and forth between seeing the president as a genuinely dangerous figure when it comes to press freedoms and his treatment of the media, and then something like this happens, which is sort of unprecedented taunting and bullying, and people just sort of laugh it up, right? Mm-hmm. So it's either kind of comical and we laugh it up, or it's an unprecedented threat to press freedom, but I don't know that it can really be both at the same time.
Thanks to Alexander Burns, Shane Goldmacher, Liz Robbins, and Nikita Stewart for joining us, and I'll have some final thoughts on Coda in a moment. For today's college students, the Columbia University takeover that closed the campus in 1968 must seem like ancient history. After all, the vitriol, the violent eviction of the protesters by the police occurred fully 50 years ago. Back then, a half-century retrospective for students would have evoked equally distant headlines about the 1918 global flu pandemic and America's rescue of Europe in World War I. Yet 5 decades after the demonstrations on the Columbia campus, the protagonist's reflections reverberate in current events. Even the epigraph of a new anthology resonates. When the country into which I had just set my foot was set on fire about my ears, it was time to stir, the commonsensical 18th century philosopher Thomas Paine wrote. It was time for every man to stir. In a new book by the same name, A Time to Stir, Columbia 68, edited by Paul Cronin, more than 60 participants and witnesses to the uprising provide impassioned first-person accounts. They are leavened by hindsight, but rekindled by stirring contemporary events. The stirring in 1968 was instigated by 2 incendiary grievances. One was the Vietnam War and the growing opposition to Columbia's ties with a weapons research think tank affiliated with the federal government. The other was Columbia's apparent tin-ear response to the sensitivities of black New Yorkers. The university was building a gym that usurped a portion of Morningside Park. Moreover, it would be accessible to neighboring Harlem residents mainly through an ignominious back door, intended actually for their convenience because of the park's sloping terrain. A Time to Stir includes only what the authors choose to remember, and the voice of Columbia's embattled administrators at the time is missing. Unlike the students, many of whom were teenagers at the time, 50 years on, most of those school officials are now dead. The demonstrators were demonized as fractious, self-righteous radicals who resorted to militant disruption when other means of protest were still available, also as absolutists who often stifled dissent and fell short of reaching a consensus about what they stood for. More than 700 were arrested. Mark Rudd, who was chairman of the Columbia chapter of Students for a Democratic Society, wrote, "We thought that militancy could become a strategy, when really it's only a tactic, which sometimes, occasionally, if you're lucky, works." Similarly, Philip Lopate observed that while the students' demands were largely met, they proved mostly symbolic. "I don't believe that righteous wrath necessarily trumps every other kind of moral authority," wrote Mr. Lopate, a Columbia student who went on to become a professor there. Carla Spurlock Evans was a Barnard undergrad who occupied Hamilton Hall as a member of the Students' Afro-American Society. She became a dean of multicultural affairs at Trinity College in Hartford. She wrote optimistically that, quote, "the swordplay between victory and sheer destruction left her deeply convinced that all things are possible when people with pure intentions and a shared sense of purpose come together. I gained a belief," she added, "in the power of listening to others, of compromise, and of politics infused with love." For the New York Times and CUNY TV, I'm Sam Roberts.